Welcome back to a new episode of the Shout at the Devils podcast. I am Justin Brady, aka Devils Fanatics, and I'm here with my co-host Daniel Amoia, aka devils.report, and he writes for the Hockey Writers. And we have a massive episode ahead. A lot has happened in these last 2 days, Devils wise, and we are going to get right into it with a big trade. The Devils trade Alexander Holtz and Akira Schmid to the Vegas Golden Knights for Paul Cotter and a 2025 third round pick. Cotter is 24 years old. He's on a 2-year contract with 775,000 cap hit. Daniel, what do you think of this trade?
See, at first, the it was kind of shocking because obviously Akira Schmid, he was basically the hero of the playoffs 2 seasons ago, and to see him fall back down to earth that quickly, and not that he was ever a truly highly touted prospect, but he showed flashes of what he can do at the NHL level, and unfortunately kind of just fell out of favor. It was a very rough past season for him. And same thing with Alexander Holtz. I see a lot of people overreacting in the sense that somewhat understandably so because Holtz was the sixth overall pick at one point and had a lot of potential a as a sniper playing alongside Jack Hughes, and it just never panned out. And his trade value wasn't that high. Let's be real. There's a reason he didn't go in the Meyer deal. There's a reason he didn't go in the Markstrom deal. Teams wanted Fabian Zetterlund and Kevin Ball over Alexander Holtz, and that says something right there. Two
And
head
also
coaches. Go
Shakir
ahead.
Mukhamaduin as well. The Sharks
Yeah,
wanted him over Holtz as well, and back in that
yeah,
Team Meyer trade.
yeah. Thing is, two head coaches, Lindy Ruff and Travis Green, and really three if you count Team Sweden, which he got cut from, have publicly denounced his play. Not that any player needs to be perfect defensively when they come up, but Alexander Holtz has always lacked the foot speed and defensive ability. And yeah, he did get a little faster, but the defensive game attention to detail in that regard just simply wasn't really good enough. And I'm not saying the Devils treat him completely fairly. There were times they gave preferential treatment to other players in comparison to Holtz, but that's all besides the point because the reality is Holtz wasn't getting it done. He's still very, very raw, and it seems more by the season that he's someone who just isn't what a number six overall pick should be. So the Devils were at least able to turn that to something. It could be debated forever, really, whether it's enough for what the Devils gave up. But regardless, Paul Cotter is someone who I definitely think fits into the Devils very well. He had 233 hits, which ranks 17th among all NHL players. His hands are great. He scored some really nice breakaway goals. I saw one highlight. I think it was against the Flyers that the Devils reposted, and it was nasty. He went between the legs around the defenseman and roofed it. I mean, it's impressive stuff. He had 25 points in 76 games, which isn't huge, but for someone who's a bottom six guy who can also kill penalties, I believe, he'll definitely play a very valuable role. I know his skating speed is I think in the 83rd percentile. So he's one of the faster players in the entire National Hockey League. And that's what the Devils need. If you remember the role that Jesper Boquist played 2 seasons ago when the Devils were constantly winning games at franchise record season, Boquist was someone who didn't have a ton of offense, but was pretty solid defensively. He had that speed that fit right into the Devils' identity, and I could confidently say that Paul Cotter is a much better player than Jesper Boquist is. So, and he's only 24 years old, so he could still certainly grow. And if he had 25 points last season, if he could somehow grow into someone who scoring 35, 40 points with that speed, with those hands, with that defensive ability, the Devils really got a gem here. And like you mentioned, the $775,000 cap hit. Tom Fitzgerald has continued to free up cap space as we await July 1st, which is likely tomorrow if you're listening to this, or the day of. Some definitely paving the way here and reshaping the Devils' identity. They showed with the draft, they showed with this move that they are emphasizing size and trying to reshape their identity. Fitzgerald himself quite literally has said that. So it definitely again, you could debate as to whether the Devils gave up too much, but in the current, I think Cotter will help the team next season more than Holtz or Schmid would have. That's what I think.
I agree 100%, Daniel. I feel like a lot of people are overreacting to this trade. At first, when I first saw it, I'm like, "Oh, what the heck did this team just do? And why?" But then I heard more and more and more, and I liked more and more when it came to Paul Cotter. I mean, like you said, 24 years old. He has a lot of time to grow in the NHL, and he was a great bottom six player for Vegas last year. He had 233 hits last season, which ranked 17th among all NHL players. Those 233 hits is more than any Devils player had all of last season. I think the Devils player that had the most hits last season was Kevin Ball, and that was like 160.
It
And
was
now Kevin,
It
oh,
was
Curtis Lazar.
Curtis Lazar had 179, but still that's what 58 more hits. So it's not
Yeah,
even close. Like
it's
Cotter
even
would have led the Devils by a wide margin. And I would argue, no offense to Curtis Lazar, but Cotter's hits are likely more impactful than Lazar's are. He's just a bigger person.
definitely. I 100% agree. And something that people are not thinking about much is obviously with Cotter. He has a lot of filthy hands. I mean, his hands are absolutely filthy. We saw so many highlights that the Devils posted. And a key thing with that is he's very good on breakaways. What's one thing that the Devils are not good at? The shootout. They are horrible in the shootout. Obviously, they weren't in the shootout much all of last season, but you know what? This season that'll probably be different. They'll probably be in the shootout more than once next season. I'm pretty sure about that. So it's good to have a guy like that who you could rely on in the shootout. So he might be a guy fit for that role, possibly. And I mean, I see 7 goals, 18 assists, 25 points. I think he's just going to grow and really adapt into this role with the Devils. The Devils needed physicality, they needed brutality in this bottom six. And Kata is now that guy to be that type of player in that bottom six that they've been needing for the longest time ever. Interesting enough. So yeah, like you said, Daniel, I think Cotter is a big upgrade compared to Alexander Holtz. Obviously, Akira Schmid, it's disappointing to see how he came from being their hero in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs against the Rangers to being traded now. And the thing is, with Schmid, he was the fourth goaltender depth wise on the depth chart for this team. And then this team just drafted a goalie in the second round in this past draft, which we will get into. So it wasn't really looking good for Schmid. So honestly, I'm okay with giving him up. But Tom Fitzgerald obviously hasn't been that high on Alexander Holtz in the past. He kind of ripped him apart a little bit after the season in that presser that he had. And Fitzgerald said today, in the vision we have to build a roster that I've talked about since the end of last season, we want a different looking bottom six. Paul Cotter fills that with his skating, speed, and physicality. We are betting on Carter's upside, and he just scratched the surface of what he can do. With that being said, we have to give up to get Akata, and Holtz would have been the odd man out in our bottom six group. That's pretty crazy to say. I thought if Holtz was going to be with this team next season, I thought he would have a role in that bottom six most definitely, but Fitzgerald did not see that at all, and now Holtz is gone. And Fitzgerald has made it clear over the past 2 years now that if he was not going to get a complete game out of Alexander Holtz, he had no problem trading him away. He tried to trade him away, as you briefly mentioned, Daniel, multiple times. He tried to trade him for, I believe, Jacob Markstrom and Timo Meyer, and both teams did not want Alexander Holtz. So, I mean, it tells you a lot that other teams do not want him, but now he's a Vegas Golden Knight. I really hope it works out for him. I think change of scenery is the best thing that Holtz needed because I just don't think it was ever going to work out in New Jersey, unfortunately. But Daniel, what letter grade as of now would you give this trade?
I mean, it's almost hard to put a letter grade on something until you see how it shakes out. But just for the move itself, I'm gonna give it a solid B as it stands, just because the Devils worked with what they had, were able to shed some cap space while at the same time in this current point in time upgrading the roster because like I said, Akira Schmid, yeah, besides those playoffs, he's struggled otherwise. Even in the AHL, he was not good in the AHL for Utica once he got sent down. I believe he had a worse save percentage than he did in New Jersey. And it wasn't just a few games, it was like almost 30 games. So it's unfortunate, but he never truly was a highly touted prospect. That what the Devils did here is they proved that they have more stock into Nico Daws and Akira Schmid. And I can't disagree with that. Dawes was always the more highly touted prospect, and now it's just the reality that, well, because there's other goaltenders in the system too who are going to need playing time in Utica and Adirondack, and with Schmid and Dawes both there, it really wouldn't have been fair to guys like Isaac Poulter who have played really well if he would have just had to sit in the ECHL because of this logjam the Devils have. So that definitely frees the Devils up a bit. Like I said, frees up some cap space, and the addition of Cotter is someone I think is going to fit them very, very nicely. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all shakes out.
Yeah, I would give a letter B as well for the grade. I think Kata is going to be a good fit here in New Jersey. I think getting rid of Schmidt and Holtz is not a bad thing at all. I didn't see them really being a part of the Devils' future in the next 5 years. Whereas Kata is a guy who's so young, has a lot to bring to the table, and can only improve from here. So I think Fitzgerald is really more betting on the fact that that Kata can only get better as time goes on. And that's not a bad thing. It sometimes those type of trades really pan out for a team. And obviously it's hard to really put a grade to it right now, but we'll see how it goes next season and in the
Yeah.
future. But obviously we have another big trade to talk
Well,
about. Oh,
before
go for it.
before
Yep.
you get into that, I just want to add real quick. Look, I know there's a lot of skeptics about dealing Alexander Holtz for what realistically is a bottom sixer.
Hmm.
But all I'm gonna say is if you're skeptical, if you're angry about it, I'm gonna ask one thing, and that's give it a chance to play out. I'm not saying Alexander Holtz won't be successful in this league, but the reality is we don't know that as a fact, and we know what Paul Cotter brings to the New Jersey Devils. So just wait it out, give it a season or two, see how Holtz pans out with Vegas, see how Cotter fits the Devil system, and then give it a judgment. But to be up in arms about it before we've seen how it shakes out is a little unfair. That's all I'm gonna say. You gotta at least give it a shot. Because how many trades? Look at the Matthew Tkachuk trade with that involved Jonathan Huberdeau with Florida and Calgary. I mean, Florida was getting absolutely ripped by people like me included, who overreacted the night the trade was put out. And fast forward down the road, that trade turned the Florida Panthers into Stanley Cup champions.
Yep.
So I'm not saying it might not be to that degree in terms of franchise changing, but it's something you have to give a shot because how it seems on the day of the trade may not be how it turns out completely. Even look at the Toffoli Sharangovich trade, how Devils fans were ecstatic about Tyler Toffoli and how that narrative quickly flipped in basically a span of a few weeks. So just give
Yeah,
it a shot.
definitely. I like what you said, Daniel. But we got to get into another big trade. John, no, this is not fitting. I gotta say it in honor of Adam Hanway. John Marino. Daniel, you have
That
a
was
better
good.
impression of me. So let's hear your John Marino.
John Marino.
In order of Adam Hanway, who says it the best. Devils defenseman John Marino was shipped to the Utah Hockey Club and as well as a fifth round pick to Utah for their 2024 second round pick, which originally belonged to Edmonton, which the Devils turned into Mikhail Yegorov. I believe I'm saying that right, the goalie, and a 2025 second round pick from Utah as well. So the Devils got some pretty good assets in this trade overall, getting two second round picks for John Marino. I mean, that's a pretty good trade, I would say. But Daniel, let me hear your initial thoughts on this.
Yes, so I think it seems that John Marino was basically the odd man out, and the Devils wanted clear cap space to bring in Brett Peshy, which we will get more into. But Marino is just on his way out. He had flashes of brilliance, but couldn't sustain it for a long enough period of time. His entire career has been good year, bad year, good year, bad year, and that's not something that the Devils could really bank on anymore. He had difficulties around the net, and the Devils gave up so many goals with broken plays, not being strong enough in front of the net, and that's something Marino was a big catalyst. He struggled. He really did struggle this season. They gave him the opportunity to prove he could be a solid top four defenseman, and while he had some good games, it wasn't enough, and it's something I think personally the Devils could upgrade from, and obviously Tom Fitzgerald and co agree with this trade. So by clearing out Marino, they're obviously going to replace him. Like I said, we'll get into his replacement, Brett Peshy, soon, but it's something they need to do. They need to shed that entire contract, and they did. Utah is taking 100% of that contract, so that was big cap wise. And 2 second round picks, that's a great thing. The Devils used one of them is in 2025, but the 24 pick the Devils used for goaltender Mikhail Yegorov, who was the number one ranked American goaltender according to NHL Central Scouting in this draft. So the Devils getting that, that's a big thing. You can't have too many goaltending prospects because the more you have, the more likely one or two of them is to pan out and turn into great NHLers. So goaltender wise, the Devils got what you could argue is possibly the best goaltender in the draft. For me personally, I'd put him second. So that's a great thing for the Devils, and they still have that 2025 second, which second rounders, like there's some pretty good NHLers that come out of the second round, like especially who the Devils have drafted lately, Lenny Haminaho, Seamus Casey. They've shown an ability to find some gems in that second round and even beyond, guys like Jesper Bratt. But yeah, it's a trade they kind of need to make if they're going to move on to John Marino. Better to move on now while his value is still relatively high and you could get assets back. So Fitzgerald, this is just another move where he's proving that he definitely has that plan in place and he's following it very, very closely.
Yeah, and people don't have to be happy about this. Look, I'm not the most ecstatic about trading Marino away, but if you want this team to progress and get better, this is the type of moves that this team has to make, unfortunately. Yeah, I know Marino's a fan favorite. I know many people love him and adore him, and I think he could have been a much better defender next season, but there's no guarantee of that. That's as you were saying, Daniel. He's very inconsistent throughout his career, and we can't really bank on him being a reliable defenseman. And I know a lot of people are saying Siegenthaler is a possible option to trade as well, but Marino was the odd man out, unfortunately. But to get 2 second round picks for him, I think is a little bit of a steal, in my opinion. I think obviously Marino has 4 years left on his deal and it's only like 27 or 28 years old. But to get 2 seconds for him, I think is a pretty good deal. And basically, you're giving up Marino just to get an upgrade and Brett Peshy or possibly another defenseman. So, and like it works out. It's gonna work out really well for I think for the Devils. Marino wasn't that much of a physicality when or didn't use his physicality much as a defender, which I think really hurt his stock. In whether the Devils decided to trade him or not. So it just didn't work out for him. And it's a shame that he was traded, but it is what it is now. Marino's gone. He's with Utah. Wish him the best of luck. But now the Devils have 4.5 million extra dollars to spend in free agency, and that was the biggest part of this trade. So overall, I'm gonna give this trade an A. I think it was a deal that had to be made, and a deal that will help the Devils in their future. What about
Yeah,
you?
I'll give it a B plus for now. I'm not gonna give it an A because we don't know how it's truly gonna end up. But as it stands, it's a move that seems pretty reasonable for the most part. I wouldn't call it an overpay on either side. Marino definitely had some value as a relatively young defenseman with a fairly team-friendly contract, especially for a team like Utah, who's closer to the cap floor. But that yeah, I'll stick with my B plus.
Yeah, and transitioning to our next topic, Brett Peshy. The Devils have been heavily linked to Peshy over the course of the last couple weeks now, and Elliot Friedman reported today that Brett Peshy is basically a lock to go to the Devils come Monday in free agency. Currently he is projected to get around 6 million per year. He's 29 years old, 6'3", so big defenseman, something that the Devils need. He's a shutdown defenseman who could play a lot of minutes in that top four role. And last season, yeah, he's not going to be the most offensive defenseman, but the Devils don't need that type of guy right now. They need a guy that can help on defense. That's what it really comes down to. He had 3 goals, 10 assists, 13 points. That's just okay. Nothing really crazy. He's not the most physical, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but he does do a great job blocking lanes. He had over 100 blocks in the last 2 seasons, which really stands out to me. So it's good to have a guy that can really block those lanes, especially on the penalty kill. So Pesci will be a very critical penalty killer for the Devils, obviously, considering that the deal still happens come Monday. Obviously, who knows what could happen? Deals fall through all the time. But obviously, there's no like tampering, but according to everybody, Frank Saravelli said it as well, that Pesci's basically a lock to go to the Devils. So it seems like it's going to happen. The stars are going to align. The Devils are going to get Brett Pesci. It's just a matter of when. So, Daniel, what are your thoughts on all the rumors around Brett Pesci right now becoming a Devil?
Yeah, it almost kind of doesn't make sense to me because there are all these rules about tampering, but they're never actually enforced because
They're never.
this is the worst kept secret in the world. The whole entire planet knows that Brett Pesci will be a New Jersey Devil on July 1st.
Yep.
And obviously there's no real like penalties there. It happens with other teams too where it gets leaked before July 1st, but just John Marino alone confirm getting rid of John Marino confirmed that. Obviously, the Devils have a hole now with a top four right-handed defenseman, and Brett Pesci I think is a pretty perfect person. He's much better around the net than John Marino. He's not physical really, like you said, but he is a big body and he does block a lot of shots. He's definitely a much better penalty killer than John Marino, and special teams are overlooked at times. They're very important. I see a lot of discussions in the off season revolve around 5-on-5 play, and people tend to like almost talk about special team success as if it doesn't really matter. Well, it does, and Brett Pesci will help the Devils in that regard. Um, he's a veteran too. He's done this a long time. He has averaged, I believe, over 22 minutes a night over 9 seasons with the Carolina Hurricanes. I mean, he just eats up minutes. He'll be reunited with Dougie Hamilton, which will be cool too. But I would certainly expect him to be paired alongside Luke Hughes, that veteran presence who will know how to play alongside talented defenseman on a good team because that's what Pesci has done. And in late and close situations, Pesci was nearly always the person that the Hurricanes relied on in the past few seasons to be out there in those big moments. And if the Devils can land him, which we're assuming they will, he's gonna slot into that role. Marino played perfectly and likely, I think, better than Marino. He'll be a little more expensive than Marino at, like you said, probably around 6 million a year. Maybe the Devils could get a slight discount for that because he did grow up in the area. But regardless, 6 million for someone who blocks a lot of shots, can kill penalties, has shown that he can play in this role for 9 years now. Um, Definitely more of a sure bet than John Marino, and I would certainly like that ad for the Devils.
And also another thing is just think about how much he will complement Luke Hughes on that pairing. Either Luke Hughes or Simone Nemec, one of those guys. He's going to complement them very well. Those two guys, yeah, they had a lot of struggles defensively last year. They have a lot of offensive upside, but they definitely need that guy by their side to help guide them and help teach them and learn these things and stuff like that, how to really master how to play defense in the NHL. So having a guy like Brett Pesci by their sides, whether it's Luke Hughes or Nemec, I think is going to be very helpful for their future going forward. So I just also wanted to add that in. Another big rumor that has been talked about is the Devils are heavily pursuing defenseman Brendan Dylan in free agency. He's going to cost around anywhere between 3 and 4 million a year. He's a veteran defenseman, 33 years old, 6'4" though. And he's another one of those shutdown defensemen who is very physical for a guy his size. He had 241 hits last season, which ranked 10th among all NHL players. And he would be a perfect bottom pairing defenseman with a player like Nemec or Hughes. So literally, you could put Pesci or Dylan wherever you want. Just put them with either Hughes or Nemec and put Siegenthaler or Hamilton at the top. And man, this is a really good defense going into next season. But obviously, nothing's given. We got to see what happens and see how it plays out. But last season, Dylan had 8 goals and 20 points, and he had a plus 20, which really stands out to me. I don't believe a Devil had more than plus 10 last season. I think that was Curtis Lazar. So It's good to have a guy that you could rely on, a guy that has been in the league for a while. It's always good to have those veteran defensemen, and Dylan could be a guy that could really fulfill that role on the Devils blue line. Daniel, what are your initial thoughts on these reports about Brennan Dylan possibly becoming a New Jersey Devil?
Well, yeah, I definitely would love the addition. I think he would also fit into the Devils really well. I don't agree that he'd ever play on anything except the third pairing unless the Devils were injured. He has in Winnipeg, he basically was that third pairing defenseman the entire time, and he did it very well. 241 hits, like you said, that's extremely impressive. That would have led the Devils by, I believe, 100 almost 100, like
A
about
lot.
80. That's absolutely insane. He just fills that role perfectly. He can play solid defense. He was a plus 20. He's nothing crazy. He's not gonna light up the score sheet, but 8 goals and 20 points isn't something to frown at. It's basically double the production that Kevin Ball had this season. So it's basically replacing Kevin Ball's role, but with better offense and better defense and more hits. So what is there to complain about there? It's not some earth-shattering move. He's not gonna be eating up 22 minutes a night like Brett Peshy will, but at the same time, he'll definitely play a valuable role. And I believe Dylan has a good amount of playoff experience as well, which is always important. And all these additions we're talking about with the Devils do have that playoff experience. So that's something they obviously want to add. You want playoff experience, you want physicality, but you also want people who can play hockey and fulfill a role. And with all the moves Tom Fitzgerald is making or appears to be making soon, it seems like that's something he's focusing on. We keep saying it over and over. Fitzgerald's plan is fully taking shape right now. We're seeing that firsthand. Whether you agree with the assets he's giving up or not, the bottom line is we know his plan. We know what he's trying to do. So we'll see how the rest of this offseason shakes up. Uh, Tomorrow really is going to be the big day, July 1st, where really we're going to see that all take place like fully because I saw a statistic. I think it was, I forget who posted, but 85 to 90% of all players signed this offseason will sign on July 1st. So the
Wow,
Devils will basically complete their team on July 1st, which
that's
is
great.
insane. And a lot of change is going to happen very quickly. And we're going to have another episode breaking down everything. But
That's
that,
okay. That's
that,
okay.
that's okay. That's what we're looking at. A lot is going to happen very quickly. It's going to be a whirlwind. And the Devils are going to look like a completely different team than they did last season. They have just under $20 million in cap space to work with.
Yeah, and talking about that cap space, let's say they do get Brett Pesci and Brendan Dillon. That's probably around $10 million spent on those two guys combined. So that means the Devils would have $9 million left in cap space. They still have to extend Dawson Mercer to a contract. They still have to make some probably other moves. But Daniel, is there one move that you would really like to see the Devils make in free agency?
Yeah, so assuming they get Pesci and Dylan to shore up their defense, that leaves them with a top six vacancy. Because now they got Paul Cotter, so that kind of rounds out the bottom six. It, there's going to be some battles in training camp, like will Brian Hallinan make the roster over Nate Bastian? Where's Nolan Foote going to slot in? Stuff like that. But with Holtz gone, they have Heischer, Bratt, Hughes,
Timo,
um,
Mercer,
Timo, Mercer,
and then
and there's
but
still
yeah.
there's like a void. There's one more top six player that they really need. For me, that person is Vladimir Tarasenko. He's a proven winner in the league. I believe Stanley Cup champion twice now, actually,
Yep.
with St. Louis and Florida. He's someone who's just the penultimate professional. Projections by AFP Analytics have him at 4.1 million for a 2-year deal, so that would be 8.2 million total. That's something the Devils can definitely afford. He's 32 years old, 6'1", 228 pounds. He scored 33 or more goals 6 times in his career, 49 goals and 73 points in 121 playoff games. He's also defensively responsible, which is something the Devils want to be better at. They were a little too defensively lackadaisical last season, and Tarasenko is just a winner. He's proven that a little bit of a Devils killer too at times. So Tarasenko could really just bring everything that the New Jersey Devils need. And for a relatively cheap price, only 2-year deal because he's more up there in age, but I don't think that's a bad thing with so many potential prospects coming up and stuff like that. The Devils don't want to lock guys up for 5, 6 years.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. I'm gonna say a different guy, maybe a guy that would be more like bottom six type of player. I know the Devils need a top six player, but I don't think they're gonna have the money to afford it unless maybe Tarasenko becomes available for them, which is okay. But I see more seeing I feel like more like Hala or Palat is gonna slot into that second line, kind of like we saw a lot last season. But I think the Devils should pursue Warren Fogle, a guy that has really improved his play significantly with Edmonton this season. He would probably cost around 3 to 3.5 million a year. He could play both left and right wing, so that gives you some versatility there. He's 20 years old, 6'2", so good size. He's coming off his best season with 20 goals, 21 assists, and 41 points. And like I said, he could slot in on either side in that third, maybe even fourth line. Maybe you could even throw him into that second line if he really proves himself. And he's not afraid to throw the body with 89 hits last season, which is more than pretty much all Devils forwards for the most part, except for maybe like Curtis Lazar and a couple others like Holla or Palat. So that's definitely good. And like I said before, he's improved as each season's gone by. He was a pretty top prospect when he joined Carolina back in 2017, 2018. And he's just gotten better year by year. And the stats show it. So I'm all having a guy like Warren Fogle, a guy who could prove himself here in Jersey and prove that he is a reliable middle six player in the NHL. I would like to have Fogle on this team.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think Fogle would be a great ad. He showed what he could do with the Edmonton Oilers this season as they made their run to the Stanley Cup. Just one thing though that scares me a little. This season was a little bit of an anomaly offense wise. It was his career best year. He's normally been slightly under 30 points to around 30 points. He had 41 points this season. So that's something I'd be a little cautious of, especially on a team that employs Connor McDavid. I don't know the numbers and how much McDavid or Draisaitl factored into his numbers. Probably not a ton,
Not a ton, yeah.
but if occasionally it could have happened and that could be a little bit of a difference in the points. Um, but yeah, he not afraid to throw the body. I mean, 89 hits is okay, but I mean that still puts him kind of middle of the pack even on the Devils.
I,
Maybe slightly
it would
towards
put
the top.
it would put him fourth among all forwards at last season that they had. So, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
no,
pretty good.
I'm not saying he's not afraid, but I think that speaks more to how not physical the Devils were than how physical Warren Fogle is.
That is true.
So,
But I do want to mention previous seasons he did have over 120 hits in two
mhm,
seasons. So he's shown over the past that he's not
yeah,
afraid to throw the body. So I
yeah,
mean, it would be a good addition. Tarasenko, I like it too. I'm all for having Tarasenko, good veteran who's proven that he knows how to win in the NHL. So either one of those would definitely help the Devils in their future. But moving on here, before we wrap up this episode, we got to talk about the NHL draft. The Devils had the 10th overall pick. They were heavily rumored to trade the pick, possibly for Marty Natchez or maybe something else, but nothing ended up happening. They sticked with the pick and they selected defenseman Anton Silayev, big guy, basically the Kevin Ball replacement when Silayev joins his team in 2 years down the line. 6'7", big shutdown defenseman that moves like a 5'10" skater. I've seen multiple reporters call him a unicorn in quotes, like just because of how crazy of a defenseman he is for his size because he moves at such a high speed. And we've seen, I don't know if you guys seen some highlights. He could throw the body. When he hits guys, he crushes them, which is something that the Devils really could use. Everybody like in the comments is like, oh yeah, Matt Rumpy's pissing his pants right now and seeing this draft pick. So I mean, it's good to have a guy like that. And he has a pretty nice slap shot based off the highlights I saw. And his comparison was Victor Hedman and the draft analysis. So I mean, being compared to Victor Hedman is pretty good, I would say. But Daniel, what is your initial thoughts on this pick?
yeah. So I actually had him ranked on my list, but second or third. I was flipping back and forth. When he dropped to the Devils at 10, my jaw dropped. I thought there was no shot he was falling to the Devils at 10. It was a very weird draft, but I think that worked out in the Devils' favor because they got someone who was basically on all accounts supposed to go in the top five. And yes, I understand he's from Russia, so it might take a little longer, but his agent confirmed yesterday to NJ.com's Ryan Novozinsky that he will be reassessing after his 2-year contract in the KHL is up, and that'll give him time to play against men while developing. The KHL is a tough league, so it'll be good competition for him, similar to the AHL. Um, he really is kind of a complete defenseman. He's not too offensive or too defensive. He's a very good skater. He has a great shot. He could chip in offensively. He proved that. He actually broke Vladimir Tarasenko's record for most points by a KHL player under 18 years old.
Wow.
That's impressive. And Tarasenko's a forward, Silayev is a defenseman. So the fact that he was able to do that, even though 11 points on paper doesn't seem like a lot, this is a 17-year-old playing in one of the hardest hockey leagues in the world, and he played 60 games, which is far more than basically any player has ever played at that age in the KHL. So just the fact that he was on the ice, period, is crazy.
Yeah, we have to wait 2 years for Silayev, but it's really not that big of a deal because the Devils are going to be making these moves in free agency to acquire these top defensemen. And by 2 years down the line, one of those deals are going to be expired. And Silayev is going to slot right into that role and probably be a top four defenseman for this team going forward in their future. And he will be a force to be reckoned with. Teams are going to be very scared when they see Anton Silayev on the opposite side of the ice.
Yeah, we keep talking about this cap world of the NHL, and the Devils are going to need to save some money in the future if they want to keep all their homegrown talent. And Silayev, that entry level deal that comes in 2 years is going to be perfect for that. He kind of just checks all the boxes like a Victor Hedman. Maybe his offense won't ever be that high, but if he's able to contribute 35, 40 points a season while being a really tough defenseman, someone who could skate really well, that's gonna be a huge thing for the Devils. So definitely exciting stuff. Like I said, I had him towards the top of my draft, so I was shocked that he slipped that low.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy with the pick and excited to see what he brings to New Jersey. He'll probably be in development camp most likely, so it'll be exciting to see how he does there. But we have a few more picks to talk about. Daniel, do you want to break that down for everybody?
Yeah, so the second round with that John Marino pick, I talked about him a bit, but Mikhail Yegorov, he had an 892 save percentage in the USHL, which wasn't great, but it's a little misleading considering that he played on the worst team in the USHL. He was completely hung out to dry, and scouts say that if he wasn't on the team, they wouldn't have won a single game. They won 8 when he played. So just that alone, he's committed to Boston University and he'll have a chance to prove himself more there. As for Kasper Pikkarainen, that's another move. The Devils emphasize size. He is 6 foot. I will tell you exactly. 6'3", 198 pounds. He's gonna play professionally in the Finnish Liga next season. Had 28 points in 34 games for his U20 team. Elite Prospects was pretty high on him. They say he lays a lot of open ice hits. But he's also a crafty passer. He plays well in the offensive end and in transition. So it's someone who, if he could refine a few things, he could be an impactful player, and he's shown that he has those physical tools. So that part of the NHL game won't be an issue. Then we have Herman Troff, who was also drafted in round 3. He plays professionally in Sweden. 6'3", 215 pounds. He was ranked as low as 39 by major outlets. The Devils picked him at 91. Hockey Writers draft analyst Stefano Rubino, who we had on last episode, said Troff's game has surprised many as he continues to develop and mature. He has shown that he is a well-rounded physical winger who can fill the middle of the ice if needed. He's aggressive and physical and has a great touch of the puck for a big man. He had 21 points in 26 games for his U20 team, and he got the call up to play at the pro level for 18 games. So he's going to be also developing against men, which is a good thing. Then with round 5, pick 139, the Devils selected Max Graham from the Kelowna Rockets of the WHL. Nothing really crazy there. He's an overager, and his ceiling is basically a Curtis McDermott type player. But an interesting one, round five pick 146, Vidi Luivara, goaltender. Playing professionally in Finnish Liga, 6'4", 207 pounds. Definitely has some potential. His glove hand size, athleticism, rebound control, and compete level for loose pucks are all strengths of his. He was ranked as high as 99 by elite prospects, and Devils picked him at 146, so that's great value there. And last but not least, Matthias Milovsky. He's a double overager, but his numbers are pretty solid. He had 11 points in 7 games for Czechia at the World Juniors, 60 points in 53 games for Baikomo in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, and 19 points in 17 playoff games too. He's physical at 6'2", 190, but also has great hands. The article I posted today, the Czech prospect page posted, he went coast to coast walking through like 4 defensemen. That's impressive. And for a 6th round pick, I know he's not the perfect prospect, but to get that value, an over point per game player who's physical, has great hands, I'm very intrigued to see how Malovsky's development pans out with the Devils, and maybe he'll one day turn into something. Obviously, like I said, we sense a trend here. The average height and weight of these prospects is 6'3.5" and 200 pounds. Considering the Devils are a team who employs a lot of players under 6 foot tall, this is something that Fitzgerald clearly made a statement for as he tries to reshape the identity of the team. So, Justin, what are your thoughts?
I mean, he's setting the tone for the future with this draft, let alone. I mean, 6'3.5" on average and 200 pounds. Daniel, like you were when you were talking about all the top players that they drafted, you were saying how they're all physical, and that just stands out to me. Fitzgerald is trying to make this team into like a juggernaut when it comes to physicality in the future, and I love that so much. You see so many teams that win Stanley Cups, they have these players who are studs and they can lay the body, and the Devils need more of that. Obviously, I'm sure they'll get more of that in free agency. They've already started to do that, but also they got to prepare for that in the future more as well because yeah, you have your core four with Jack Hughes, Timo Meyer, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, and then you could add in Luke Hughes and Simone Nemec into the fold. But outside of Timo Meyer, that core is really not physical whatsoever. So you need guys for the present and the future to bring that physicality for this team. So I love what Fitzy's doing here in this draft. He showed that the Devils obviously, like he's like basically saying the Devils have to address this now and have to keep on going with this trend. So I love it. But overall, physicality, brutality, that's the trend of this team going forward, and I'm all for it. So a lot to monitor over these next couple days here. Obviously, who knows? Maybe another trade happens when we release this episode. Knowing this team, anything could happen. But we're looking at free agency right now. The Devils are heavily favored to get Brett Peshy. They have a good chance at getting Brendan Dylan in free agency, maybe another player. Obviously, they have to re-sign Dawson Mercer. A lot of things still have to get done on the agenda for Tom Fitzgerald, and I'm so excited to see what happens. We're going to have a new episode most likely Monday night. Well, we're going to make it Monday night, and we'll come out the next day, so Tuesday, and we'll talk about all the moves that the Devils made on day one of free agency. So really looking forward to that. But thank you guys for listening. We appreciate all your support as always, the views, the engagement, everything, as I
It's been
mentioned in the
awesome.
past. It's been awesome. Like, I mean, it means a lot, and we're just growing from here. If you have any suggestions or recommendations, please leave them in the comments or on our socials at shout out to Devils, devils.report, Devils Fanatics on our Instagrams. Please let us know if there's anything you want us to talk about or anything that we can improve on going forward here. But love you guys. Appreciate everything. And until next time, peace out.
Thank you for listening to Shout at the Devils by your hosts, Justin Brady and Daniel Amoia. As always, let's go Devils, baby! Woo!